Inside the Beltway with Star Parker, and I am your host, Star Parker. We're on Urban Family Talk, and I want to welcome you to be with us this morning. I'm very excited to introduce you to a couple of dear friends and guests who will also be guest hosting on Mondays. Remember, I started this radio endeavor to bring you information from inside the Beltway, from a Christian perspective, how it touches your lives, because our lives touch, and public policy touches all of our lives. And so we need to understand as Christian people what is occurring in our nation's capital. As I mentioned to you last week, the scripture in Psalm 11, he says, if the foundations are destroyed, what will the righteous do? And we have to always ask ourselves that question. What will we do if they make laws that are against the biblical precedents that we want, or the biblical worldview that we say we believe? So we are going to be visiting. I'm going to be here with you every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, live. And on Mondays, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to have what's called Ministry Mondays. Ministry Mondays inside the Beltway with Star Parker will include Lonnie Poindexter. He's our Director of Outreach and Education here at Cure. And actually, he is developing our national pastor network of people that are serving in at-risk communities all over this country. They're the decent people that are in quiet communities just doing what they know the Lord has asked of them. And they get a little bit of attention every now and then, but we are going to be interviewing and letting you know what some people are doing all across this country. And when it comes to where our lives touch, and more specifically with where our lives touch the poor, because these are folks that work with the at-risk youth, at-risk environments, at-risk women, to make sure that they have someone caring about them, and you then will be able to care about them as well. Lonnie's not done radio before, so he's going to be my guest today. I'm going to ask him a few questions, get into his life a little bit, why he's doing the work that he's doing, and then he will transition into hosting on Mondays, Ministry Monday, and bringing you information from these pastors and others across the country. His co-host will then be Dean Nelson, who runs the outreach program for the Black church community at CareNet. And CareNet is just the most wonderful work when you think about those lives that God started on a journey to come here and maybe make a difference, but while they're in the womb, because we as a nation think that there's nothing wrong with going up in a womb and dismembering these young souls that God has created. We have abortion in our society, so they get snuffed out early. So what CareNet does is they have established an umbrella for more than 2,000 crises pregnancy centers across the country, so that when women are in crises, when they don't know what to do, when they're hearing all of the voices from others that say, no, go kill it, kill it, kill it. There's nothing wrong with it. There's no mental, there's no medical, there's no moral implications to it. Just go. They have someone that says, please don't. That God has a way, that the Lord will be with you, and so will we. We will walk you through. And in most of our crisis pregnancy centers across the country, they'll have various names: pregnancy care centers, First Choice, all types of places that women can go and say, I don't know what to do. And most of them, we can get an ultrasound, and they can see their baby, perhaps even the heartbeat, because then we know they won't destroy that life. 90% of the time when they see that baby on that ultrasound, it's like, whoa, it really is alive. And so we're able to help rescue the women there. They find parenting classes. They find a little mommy money if they go to the parenting classes, so that they then can pick items for their baby as they move toward having that child. They find a lot of love and care in our centers. Well, the centers all across the country now, there are some estimates of about 5,000. CareNet umbrella, some mostly in the evangelical Protestant world. Then Heartbeat serves in the Catholic world. And then a lot of our centers are just independently owned and operated, similar to any other business. They're just in the nonprofit world, taking care of those that are in their local communities. And so many of these directors of the centers and some of their supporters or helpers will come to a national conference that CareNet does, or they'll come to a resource center like CareNet and get information. And every year, especially the big one, thousands come to hear from and to connect with, and they hear from good speakers and they connect with each other to really build their local ministries. And Dean Nelson has been tasked in CareNet to make sure that the urban pastor knows what's going on in his local community and that he can then lead his congregation to participate. So Dean will be joining us in a little bit. He's stuck on the freeway somewhere, and I know I don't call them freeways here in Washington, D.C., but we call them freeways in California, where I'm originally from, and actually we call them parking lots more often than not. So I understand how he's out there stuck in traffic, and what I'm going to do when he gets here is say, okay, next Monday I will not be here to say, make sure you leave an hour earlier, and then that way you could be here when we begin. But Lonnie's here because Lonnie stays right up the street, and he can walk down, and he actually did, and we're actually, I'm very, very personally thankful for Lonnie, because when a year or so ago we started talking about expanding Cure and expanding Cure's ministry into these hard-hit communities and availing these pastors to information that they're not getting from their legislators or their elected officials in these hard-hit communities. These hard-hit communities have been controlled by the left for the last 50 years, and it's been rare that a conservative voice goes in and organizes and mobilizes and educates these pastoral communities. So long, and even though we knew that a third of blacks in this country poll as evangelical and conservative. They've been polling like this for 20 years, but yet we don't see them. And so we thought, well, let's go find them, especially after Jeremiah Wright hit the scene. It was like, whoa, that is not the image of black church that we want out there, because for every Jeremiah Wright, there's one that hasn't bowed to Baal. I was just reading the other day, this weekend, about Elijah, and when God had to tell him after Jezebel and Ahab, he's just like crying, and God said, no, I have 7,000 men who have not bowed to Baal. And in that, he then found Elisha, and we all know the story of Elisha and how he got a double portion of that amazing anointing and was able to just further the work of the Lord at that point. So what Lonnie is doing is going to find all those 7,000 men who have not bowed to Baal. And it's a hard work, because the left is very cruel to anyone that would stand up, especially if they're black, and say, I too agree with the conservative principles of traditional values and limited government and free markets and strong national allegiance and defense. And so when they do that, they get a lot of headache. And so it's a quieter network. Lonnie has been working on it. And about a year ago, when I said, now, are you ready to move to Washington, D.C. and work on it? He set aside his life and said, I will do this. I'm coming to Washington, D.C. And so, Lonnie, I want to welcome you, and I want to thank you, and I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself, because you're a businessman. And so now to move to nonprofit, I remember when our pastor said, you want to make money or you want to make a difference? And you had to think about that. But I think a lot of your values come even from your mom and dad, because you have a very strong, what we would call conservative background. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Welcome to Inside the Beltway with Star Parker, and I'm turning the microphone over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Star. It is truly a pleasure to be here on the radio program this morning, and just as importantly, to be a part of this wonderful work that's taking place through Cure. I'm tremendously excited about the work that's being done and the work that's going to be coming forward. The work that we'll be doing, working together with pastors across the country and Christian activists to stem the tide, if you will, of what we're all seeing that goes against the very tenets of the faith of which this nation was built upon. My background is not unlike many African Americans in this country. I was raised fairly conservative by two wonderful parents who I'm still blessed to have with me today. That taught me the basics in the original tenets of the faith as to how to conduct oneself, self-determination, independence, standing up for yourself, and also saying the truth and speaking what's right. As we see today that things have really moved in a different direction from that. I come from a background of over 25 years in the high-tech industry, particularly in Silicon Valley, where I work with some of the industry startups, which are now household names today. And so I had a chance to have a good ride with that. But there's always been that clarion call that's been in the back of my mind, that I knew one day that I would be a part of an organization like this. And Star and I have known each other for a number of years. I've seen her grow this organization from inception until what it is today. And it's truly exciting to see what God is doing in terms of moving this agenda forward to stem the tide, if you will, of what's taking place across the nation. Again, thank you, Star, for having me be on board. And I look forward to doing work within CURE and specifically within CureNet, which is what I'm specifically tasked with, which is the national network of pastors across this nation who happen to have a conservative and biblical worldview, who are preaching from the pulpit the original tenets of the faith. They're not moving left or right as it relates to politics, but they're speaking from what the Word says and what God has commanded them to do. And they know that the church is really the first responders that deals with social issues, and that we can best administer those across this great nation and not our government.
You know, you're right, and we've known each other more than 20 years, and actually our first meeting was at church. We had a mutual pastor at that time, and there was discussion then not just about what the ills were in our society and how basically us as Christians became couch Christians and were not dealing with the culture, that it started to get out of control. And so we were working then in pro-life. And if I recall, the pastors then were laying hands on you and believing then that you had a great call of the Lord. So I think it's a fit for you to now be working in these areas. But now, one of the questions that comes up when I think about the pastors and their challenge in their communities, we know that they're conservatives. We know that many do preach the gospel from the pulpit. What do you think is the breakdown? What happens when a pastor puts forth what we might consider an extremely conservative message, but then he does not translate that for his congregation into how they should be involved in public opinion and or public policy? So they're left on their own to go and vote. And when they do go and vote, they then go and vote according to the left, who has spent time with the same people groups to convince them that collectivism and or socialism is the best way that they can move their agenda forward. So what happens? I know you recently were availed to some information about the Johnson initiative that actually has put barriers around the church. Are you free to discuss some of that from your private meetings?
Based on a conference we attended last week discussing the Johnson Amendment, which was an amendment that was passed that sets some limitations on what the church or the pastors in particular can do from the pulpit, and was a very illuminating conference because it actually spelled out what you can and what you cannot do. And so many of the pastors that were in attendance were let's say they were illuminated as to they had a lot more latitude than they originally thought, but they are hamstringed, and we know historically that the church has been the meeting place or the town hall, if you will, for moving forward with any initiatives that would speak against anything that was seen as wrong in this nation. The church is the conscience of our nation and the moral compass of our nation, and so for them to be hamstringed in any area at all is a problem. I think that it's actually a great question, Star. What you see, first of all, I think, is that from those who expound the truth from the pulpit, they have their congregation on Sundays for 2 to 3 hours, and on Wednesdays typically, and maybe for Bible study in the middle part of the week. The rest of the week, from 8 in the morning, listening to the news, to the evening news, to the magazines and publications, social media, and so forth. There's a different agenda afoot, so I think their congregation
and the
is
schools.
bombarded.
Don't forget the schools.
Oh my God, yes, yes.
The indoctrination through the schools. But yeah, go ahead. You're
yes,
right.
in fact, the schools, that's where the next generation is indoctrinated, and that's part of the problem that we see today as we have a new generation now that is voting and making stance that's completely in opposition to probably even what their parents and certainly what their grandparents we're teaching and we're standing for. So, I think it's an excellent question. I think the solution is that there needs to be more outreach into the community that's speaking the truth and speaking on a foundation of what we can stand on. And we also need to mobilize. Mm-hmm. And that is part and parcel to what CureNet is about.
You're right, and I am so thankful that we're actually building an opposition force. And when we come back from a little break, I want to introduce you to Dean Nelson. He did make it off the freeway, or the highway, as they like to call it out here, and he's going to share it with us, and I'll ask him some similar questions. In our third part of our program today, I'll let the both of them get involved in some dialogue and invite you too. You need to like us at facebook.com/StarParkerForFreedom, or Twitter us at Star Parker, or visit our website at urbancure.org. Inside the Beltway with Star Parker. I know I'm supposed to talk to you, but I want to hear the voices of Liberty Choir from Spirit of Life Ministries. They created this intro just for us. America, America, God has shed his grace on you. But we have to talk about issues inside the Beltway with Star Parker. So I'm Star Parker, wanting to discuss with you today here on Urban Family Talk all types of issues from all over the country and how they touch our lives. And much of it is because of public policy. You know, when you think about public policy, it's this one big circle of public life. Public policy influences then public behavior then influences public opinion, then you get public policy. And what we've been doing is defining policy and public down. Who said it before? Defining deviancy down. And so, well, Inside the Beltway with Star Parker is doing is bringing a Christian perspective to the news so that we can begin to engage ourselves again in public policy so that we can get the kind of laws that help people encourage good behavior. One of the things that Lonnie Poindexter just brought up to us about the values that he has today were stimulated and started by the values that his parents instilled in him. And what has happened is we've had a disconnect in those values because, frankly, public policy has told people there are no natural consequences to your sexual activity. We have safety nets. Don't worry about a thing. And so family life over time has broken totally down. So public behavior started to change. And when public behaviors change, where people are basically doing whatever they want to do anytime they want to do it, public opinion starts to change about those behaviors. And then public opinion says, well, I don't understand then why we can't have, for instance, gay marriage. And the next thing you know, you have public policy that says, yeah, I don't understand anymore either because I'm a politician. All I want to do is keep my job. So if the public opinion says this is what I want to do, then I'm going to put my finger up and see which way public opinion is saying now. And then you get a law that says, go ahead, do whatever you want to do. And then public behavior says, well, we can do that. Now maybe we can do this. And the next thing you know, we're on the other side of the culture trying to interject truth once again. So what I have for you on Ministry Mondays here on Inside the Beltway with Star Parker is an opportunity for you to not only share some of my friends with me, Lonnie Poindexter, who heads up the Outreach and Education Department at CURE, the Center for Urban Renewal and Education, but also Dean Nelson. Dean Nelson is the Vice President of Urban Initiatives for the Underserved at CareNet, and I already explained to you CareNet. CareNet is an amazing organization that specifically looks at pro-life and says we have to build out alternatives if someone is in crisis. We know Roe v. Wade is national law. Okay, I know. I know that there are others, including those in the White House, that believe that, well, it's settled law. No, it might be legal, but it's not lawful in God's eyes. So, no, there will come a time that we will rid ourselves of this national law that puts the blood of the innocent on all of our hands and insists that we're going to, through the blood of the innocent on all of our hands, pay for and encourage as a society abortion from the moment of conception all the way through the 9th month, 9th hour. And believe me, there are some left-wing extremists that are insisting that we should even allow the child to be born and then give it a couple of years for the parents to decide whether this is a viable life. And then if we deem it not valuable and or not viable, then the parent should have opportunity to have that child put to death through assisted suicide and all these other terms that they make seem so glamorous today, which is what we're talking about. Public opinion can change based on public policy and public thought. So we're the new public thought. And Dean Nelson has become a friend over the last 5-6 years now, fast friend and very good friend, because his mind is where my mind is to say, oh no, these things that may be legal should not be lawful. And we are going to make sure, these things that are lawful should not be, however it goes, where what we're doing in public policy that's inconsistent with the scripture needs to stop. And so we're working on stopping. But then you have people like CareNet that are saying, in the meantime, we're going to make sure that we rescue one by one. I think the work of our crisis pregnancy centers is like Harriet Tubman. During slavery, it was law of the land slavery. And while you had many people working to rid ourselves of that law of the land slavery, you had people like Harriet Tubman and abolitionists pulling them out one by one. So I just really appreciate that you're here today. And I know you got talked into last minute co-hosting with Lonnie every Monday, Ministry Monday. And we're going to then introduce some of the other pastors that you think are important for our audience to hear as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Star, for being or allowing me to be on the program. It's exciting, one, knowing you and the vision and the mission for Cure. It is way past time for our community to be informed, to be educated, and to be empowered to really make a difference in our communities, particularly in the urban communities where we have been so hard hit and so devastated. And so that's very much in line with what CareNet is all about. Today we celebrate the fact that we have over 1,180 pregnancy centers that are part of our network nationwide, and a growing number of them in urban communities, cities like Philadelphia, cities like Atlanta, cities like
Philadelphia
Detroit.
sure needed one after what we're hearing in the news with Gosnell.
Oh, my goodness.
I mean, goodness, what a murderer. And you explain to people what's happened there. I don't mean to interrupt you, and I'm glad you guys are doing work, but Philadelphia, this is a national case that's occurring right now where the man was just sloppy.
It is tragic. There is just to highlight, there is a brand new short film called 3801 Lancaster that does an excellent job of chronicling actually what took place. I mean, this was a man who was quote-unquote respected within the community, but when a closer examination came to look and see what he was actually doing in these clinics with these late-term abortions, not only was it just a filthy, blood-stained, environment, but they also noticed that, from the district attorney's office, that they noted that the practices, even in these late-term abortions, where their babies would almost be half delivered, and then he would literally snip or sever the spinal cord of the child. And in some of the testimonies from some of the women, they were stating that he was very rough and demanding that they shut up while he do this because it was all about the money. I mean, this man was a multimillionaire, had over $100,000 worth of cash right there in the facility. So there's this is what we see.
Is it true that he actually had baby parts that he collected baby parts?
Baby parts, fetal remains,
this is
all
sick.
Throughout the entire building.
Safe, legal, rare.
And that is the issue. What people don't understand with abortion is, if after 40 years we have created a multi-billion-dollar industry that is largely unregulated. And so when that happens, you have all kinds of things that take place that are horrendous. We believe that what we see in Philadelphia can also be found in many other cities across America. And I don't know if America is quite ready to see this front and center, but we've been talking about this for a long time, and it's really sad that it has to come to this, where you have a quote-unquote respected black physician who was doing all of these late-term abortions, and not to mention the number of women that died at his hands because of the unsanitary conditions and the practices there in that abortion clinic in Philadelphia.
Well, sometimes we have to see, and we need to be ready to see, because that's what happened. Remember Emmett Till? That's when we knew that enough is enough with what was going on in the South with Jim Crow. I mean, we hear about the lynchings. You hear about everyone wants to be silent about this. During slavery, we had to see what we were doing as a people so that we would be horrified by it, and we need to be horrified. And I'm shocked that the national media is letting even this trial go on without giving it attention. If they really care about women, how do you have his whole staff pleading guilty, and yet he's sitting there saying, well, it's racism, you're coming after me, with this type of history and this type of filth? And we're not going to have a full show on Gosnell, what's happening. You just happen to mention that you have a center there, because where sin abounds, grace much more. And I tell you, the fact that you have a center where you care about women in Philadelphia matters. And you were saying also in Atlanta. I think I'm going to be visiting your Atlanta center, and I'm speaking at their banquet coming up here soon.
That's exactly right. I did hear about that. Really excited. But the bottom line is that in these urban areas for so long, there have been so many of these abortion clinic, abortion mills, and nobody has really understood or known the examples that exist with these pregnancy centers that are providing free services to women who find themselves in an unplanned pregnancy. And then they're also connecting them to communities that are going to help them so that they don't make the same kinds of decisions. And it's amazing, not too long ago, there was a study that was done that showed within the African-American community, Planned Parenthood enjoys a 70% favorability rating. But the good part, though, is that when they were told through these focus groups, when they were told about the history of Planned Parenthood, and then they were told about the viability and the hope of these pregnancy centers, what we saw is Planned Parenthood's rating dropped to 50%, and pregnancy centers, who most people didn't know anything about, they actually rise to about 80%. So what we need to do is to continue to get the information, out
there
so that people know that there, again, are free services, whether they are providing ultrasounds, whether they're providing free pregnancy tests, or in many cases, free material assistance. I mean, we've had cases like in New York City where a young woman actually went to a Planned Parenthood to get a car seat because she was going to have her baby, and they told her at Planned Parenthood, well, no, we don't have any car seats for you. That's over at the pregnancy center. But if you come in here, we'll take care of that problem for you, and it'll only cost you $1,000.
Right.
So
or taxpayers, because for Planned Parenthood, every 94 seconds they do an abortion, and every 94 seconds the taxpayers of this country send them $1,600. So it's someone else is paying for that. But that's interesting that now they know that we're giving away car seats and all the kind of goodies. And actually, it's not a free giveaway for those of you that say, well, I'm tired of handout community. No, actually, they have to work for that. They have what's called mommy money. It's an organized environment to where they go through the parenting classes and the abstinence classes and life management classes. And then they find out that they can earn money. It's little mommy money. So it's like Monopoly money. And with that money, they can go into the little stores that are set up at the centers and pick whatever they want all through the stages of their child's life. And what's unique also in this environment for any pastor that wants to say, wow, what can I do to help? Well, what you can do is put the baby bottles in the back of your church in the foyer, because they also collect monies in the baby bottles. They have blue bottles and pink bottles, most of these centers, and they allow you to make collection, let people put the brochure there. So if anyone they know or someone in your congregation knows someone that's dealing with a crisis pregnancy, they have that information available. But also your congregates can give by just putting a little bit of money, all their loose change, in the baby bottle. So, Dean, I'm going to ask you, though, before we get too far into ministry, I am just so excited, as you guys can tell, about both Lonnie and Dean. I mean, these are good-looking brothers, too. When we get that little webcam in here, you're going to see them. You'll be like, oh, man. And Lonnie, you women out there, are single man. But Dean Nelson, you're a married man with children. And, I mean, God has just really moved in your life. But tell us a little bit about your life. Who are you, and where'd you come from, and how did you get to the point that you care so deeply for those that are in need and those that are underserved, that you're spending your time in this profession? Sure.
Well, Star, not unlike yourself, I was at some point in my life, actually, when I was a college student, was actually confronted by a man of God that really basically challenged me to what it meant to live a life of responsibility for God. And at that point, I had to honestly say, I might have grown up in the church, but I did not have a vital encounter with the living God. And what that did was that made me, as a college student, want to pursue and understand everything about the Creator and what He had done. And so that put me on a track to understanding what we now call biblical worldview. How do I view things of the world if God is the creator of this world? And so it put me on a track, one, to be an example, because while I was there in college, I was bold about living for God, preaching at the amphitheater at the University of Virginia, but wanting to see other students come to know that Jesus Christ was real and that He had a plan for our lives. And so I was often confronting, the football players, the basketball players, on what it meant to be a man of God, to live righteously and to stand, uncompromisingly for the truth. And so at that time, when I graduated from the University of Virginia, I then went to work for someone that a good friend, Wellington Boone Ministries, where I was, again, traveling around the country, preaching, teaching on biblical worldview, and discipling other young men. Because what I realize is, with the crisis of fatherhood within our community, we need to have men who are willing to take others to mentor them. Since that time, I've always had a young man, even today, living in our home, particularly those from broken homes, because they need to see an example of what a family is like. Not a
Right. I
perfect
think
family, but a real family.
A lot of folks in our society today don't know just how broken family life is now. They don't understand, and that there was a time that family life was healthy, in particular in the Black community. And so I just want to interject real quick that 70% of children in the 60s were raised in married households.
That's exactly
That's
right.
reversed now. 70% are raised in single households. So by the time you're in college, because you're a young man, you could see that, wow, something has broken down. And you saw this and you wanted to get involved. And Wellington Boone is amazing minister for the Lord. And I'm glad to hear this. So continue. And so I want to get to when you met your wife. I only have a couple of minutes in this segment, but
Sure. Well,
tell us all about the details.
Well, one of the things, in meeting Bishop Boone, I remember, this message that he used to preach. Probably not so popular today. It was called "Dating is of the Devil." But what it simply meant was it challenged us to rethink how we lived our lives and even our courtship and our practices. And so,
I have a really good friend in media that needs to hear that again. Say that again. Dating
is of the devil.
Go ahead.
But it was simply really making us to really examine the scriptures about how we lived our lives and how our practices were, and they should be in line with the scripture. And that's when I saw his example, I understood that teaching. I was blessed 5 years after graduating from college to find my wife, who was a graduating senior at the College of William and Mary, who had come from a broken home.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, she grew up not in a Christian environment, but got saved at an early age, and it was really through her faith that the psychiatrist told her parents that you need to leave her alone, stop trying to get her out of the church. The church is the stabilizing factor that has helped her during this tumultuous divorce. And so, in any case, my wife and I got married. We've been now married for 16 years.
Wow.
We have 3 beautiful children
They
for
are
which
beautiful.
we homeschool.
Yes.
Blessed to have them, and we're trying to raise them up in the fear of God.
Well, and we're going to, on Ministry Monday and other times, talk about homeschooling and all these other public policy areas, because these are real people with real lives and a biblical worldview in their lives. Inside the Beltway with Star Parker here on Urban Family Talk. I want to get some tweets from you at Star Parker. I want to get some Facebook time with you at Star Parker for Freedom, or visit our website, urbancure.org. My hour sure goes by fast when you're talking to such brilliance, such God-fearing. It's just unbelievable sometimes that, I shouldn't say that we're unbelievable, because with God we know that it's possible, and he can reach in the heart and change folks. And you're looking at or listening to 3 that he just totally reached in the heart and changed. You're listening Inside the Beltway with Star Parker on Urban Family Talk. And I sure appreciate the folks at Urban Family Talk who give us this opportunity. And it's not just me on Urban Family Talk. You will hear from a lot of your favorites. We were just discussing Bishop Harry Jackson gave me a call last week, because I said, how are you doing this every day? And he said, well, here's the secret. Okay, I've got a couple of co-hosts. I tape some shows, and I'm not, in advance when I have to travel. So we'll be working this through. But I'm very, very excited to be here on Urban Family Talk, and I hope that you will share with your friends, as well as allow them to look on the website for the Urban Family Talk little, what do you call that thing, you guys, where they put that little button thing and people tap on it, icon, whatever. I mean, all this new language. Now I have to, I didn't do well in language school when we went to high school and you were supposed to learn another language. So now I've got to learn this whole new computer language. And, people are liking you, Star. Look how many likes you got. I'm like, what kind of likes do I have, honey? You're liking, they liking you, they liking you or whatever. But you can like me too at facebook.com, Star Parker for Freedom, or you can tweet me at Star Parker. Or what I was getting with that little Urban Family Talk icon, or what, a push button or app. That's the word I was looking for. My 56-year-old brain finally got the word I was looking for. It's called an app. You can do that on urbancure.org, and you'll see Urban Family Talk there. And that way your friends will know as well, because we are going to push these ideas or have discussion about these ideas in our at-risk communities. Because as Lonnie Poindexter was talking to you earlier, there's a void, there's a vacuum that we have not filled. This community of people have gotten 50 years of steady liberal diet. And so we're grasping to the values that our grandparents may have had. And Dean Nelson was just talking about his wife, Julia, and how, there was a point in her life, she didn't even get introduced to the Lord. Neither did I. So I can really identify with her, and perhaps why we connected so well when we first met, because you folks wonder if you can even live in this society and never see a church or never meet a Christian. Yes, you can live in this society and never see a church and never meet a Christian. And so that means that we have a lot of work to do to not just share the gospel. As Dean mentioned in his own life, he was confronted in college, and he alluded to when I was confronted, I was living a really lawless life. I believed the lie of the left, and I was out of control and recklessly out of control and living on welfare and just kind of partying all day, and met a Christian community, 3 men in a store that I wanted to pay me some under-table money to not tell the welfare that I was going to be collecting a little extra cash on the side, and that's how I got to meet the Lord. They looked me in my face and pointed a finger at me and told me my lifestyle was unacceptable to God. And after them encouraging me, very much encouraging me to go to their church one day by harassing me, I finally one day went to their church and I heard the gospel. That God was in Christ, that he was reconciling the world to himself, that he wasn't counting my sin against me, that he loved me, that he had died for me. I mean, come on, you guys, this is great news. And I'm so glad that people shared this news, not just with Lonnie Poindexter, but with Dean Nelson. And what they're going to be doing now on Mondays is we're going to have Ministry Mondays, because I won't be here to talk to you all of the time. I might call in or tweet in or Facebook in every here and there, but I need that kind of flexibility so I can still get out into the grassroots and do the work of the Lord in other areas. So here on Inside the Beltway with Star Parker, on Mondays, you'll have Ministry Monday with Lonnie Poindexter and Dean Nelson. That's why I've introduced them to you today. So, Dean, I want to continue with you, and then I'm going to come back to Lonnie, because I want to know a little bit more about some of the ministers that you know and the stories that they're telling you and the work they're doing. I know Lonnie, one in particular on school choice, he had to close his school, and yet, he's really serving. And I'm hoping that you're going to actually interview with the bishop there so that he can tell his story. But, Dean, I want to ask you about your story when it comes to availing these pastors to now more information than just CareNet. You're very well letting them see what has happened with abortion in their communities. I mean, we have some communities where 6 in 10 black babies are just being killed. Philadelphia, I think the numbers were already at 50%. And it's just tragic what is happening there. But before you came in, Lonnie was explaining to them about the Johnson Initiative and how many of these pastors are just basically living in fear. It's one of the reasons that they're not talking to their congregates about really critical public policy and how it touches their everyday lives. What was that about?
Yes, Star. Actually, just last week, as Lonnie mentioned, the ECFA, which is the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability, hosted here in D.C., particularly for African-American pastors and ministry leaders, a session that really they wanted to talk about 2 things primarily. One, they wanted to talk about religious liberty, because what they've identified is that particularly with the threat of same-sex marriage around the country, a lot of African-American pastors are concerned about the threat to them being able to preach freely from the pulpit what they believe.
Isn't that something? Because if they were liberals, they wouldn't have to be afraid. It's only the conservative. So you had a room. Lonnie came back and was like, we had all kind of conservative pastors in that room. You had a room full of brothers that were talking, that were listening to this type of information. So go ahead.
Well, it was amazing because they come from a lot of different stripes from all cities. But when it came down to this fundamental issue about them preaching freely what they want to from their pulpits, you would have thought that you had a room full of strong Republican conservatives, just because when it hit that chord about religious liberty, some of them began to shake their heads and kind of wake up and says, wait a minute, this should not happen.
Right,
and it was because, as was stated, 1954, what's referred to as the Johnson Amendment, which really was one of the first restrictions placed on nonprofits and on churches about what they could actually do. They can't now, endorse, from pulpit using their 501c3. Mm-hmm. So the question really came with a lot of those ministers is, well, why should there be any restrictions on us if this is an amendment, First Amendment issue? Why should we even be dealing with this? So there was a resurgence of ministers that were saying, maybe we need to just take all of the restrictions off of us.
Wow.
So it was really exciting to see how many of them really galvanized behind this issue.
Well, let me ask you this. How deeply did they go into Johnson, that this is named after a particular figure in American history and, or shall we say, public policy, President Lyndon Baines Johnson, who not just gave us restrictions and tied the church's hand, but tied the church's hand during a real interesting period of time. We were struggling through a civil rights movement where black pastors were saying, remove these governmental barriers. We want to live free. We want to educate. We want to get into economic stability. But we were also in a time of war with Vietnam. We were in a time of struggling for what role a woman and a wife was going to play in her home. God laid out a plan, and now we had this sexual revolution that said we don't like that plan anymore. So he's an interesting character. Did you guys get into a little bit? Oh, did I mention he's also the one who created and started this war on poverty that destroyed black families?
Well, they didn't go into full detail. They simply wanted to try to highlight to these pastors that, listen, there have been restrictions, and the restrictions could go even further. But I think that it's important, though, that you note, and what we within our movement, particularly here at Cure, are trying to do is to help to illuminate the truth so that people can make those connections that, hey, the values that you hold dear, oftentimes you're voting against those values because you don't really have a level of accountability for those that we actually put into office.
Well, I'm glad to know that they didn't go into all of it, because that would have been over diet, overkill. We were just, a couple of members of my staff and I, we went over to one of these real high-end restaurants. I don't know if I should name them on air, so I'm not going to, that has all you can eat meat. I mean, they come endlessly to the table and you have to turn the card upside down. And I tell you, after a while, you're just, I don't care how hungry you were when you got there, you're just over full, within two little servings. And so you don't want to overserve, but I'm glad to know. And Lonnie, I want you to weigh in, because I think that when you think about these pastors, you've been working with them in Cure because 10 years ago, you worked with me to establish the program, to write the details of CureNet, to say, these folks need a regular diet. I think that you guys have already expressed that when people get information, they make the right choice. They knew right then, they didn't need the politics behind it. No. They just knew that our hands are tied. And why did they tie? Oh, and how do we get them back untied? And this is a good thing to happen with the passion of these black pastors, and particularly these bishops. So tell me now a little bit more about the pastors themselves, and what kind of open door you see in that we will be able to build out this CureNet that you've envisioned with Cure for the last 10 years.
Well, one of the things I noticed at the conference that Dean and I attended is that, as you stated, the politics set aside, they were alarmed and they were emboldened, and there was righteous indignation about the information that was shared with them. And the information is important, and it's tantamount to mobilizing pastors throughout the nation to move. And that's what we're doing with CureNet. CureNet we're the entity that disseminates the information out to the clergy community so they can inform their congregants, and they can take and they can map their spiritual stance in terms of the Word of God along with the political stance. Because anyone thinks that we're separate is realizing that the tenets of the faith, the tenets of this nation, the Constitution, and everything that it stands for, including the Bill of Rights, was built upon a foundation of belief in God. You can't separate the two.
Welcome.
As much as you want to, you can't separate.
Oh, America,
them.
the beautiful. We're trying to keep it that way.
As a community of people have, number one. And I think that you recently for Cure, you hosted a press conference, and it was mostly on the gun issue, which seems out of norm with the traditional types of subjects we bring to the black community. They get it on abortion, and they're sick, and they're starting to respond, as Dean has told us, and in particular setting up centers in hard-hit communities and starting to address this breakdown. They get it when it comes to homosexual marriage. In fact, this is the only community that said in the beginning, no, and stop using civil rights language. I think that what they didn't realize is how entrenched liberalism is, and how the black community is so viewed as a special interest group in the Democrat Party that they didn't have to listen to them at all. They dismissed them and said, well, you're not going to do anything about it anyway. You're going to still vote with us. But you hosted this press conference, and
And what it seemed you found were pastors who came to the forefront on this issue as well. They got it.
Environment.
What happened?
We had pastors that reached out, or we reached out to, and then some that reached out to us directly that wanted to participate in this conference because they had been actually walking this walk in terms of the Second Amendment for some time now. Pastors like Ken Blanchard, who is here local to the D.C. area, who has been actually fighting this fight for 20 years and was really excited about the fact that we brought it to the forefront. The thing that came to mind with many of them is they just didn't know. They did not understand there was a connection between what happened with gun regulations and the black community. So we were able to go out and reach out to the academic community with the research papers and the documentation and the white papers and so forth that spoke to the history of gun regulations and how it was all started to hem blacks and keep blacks from moving forward once they were emancipated and during Reconstruction. And so once that was brought to the table, they stood en masse with us, and we had a record turnout. And I'll tell you, the video that we put together here at Cure, part of the Never Again campaign, went completely viral. We continue to get feedback across the nation and even internationally about folks giving us kudos for coming forward with that and looking for more to come.
Well, that whole campaign is up on our website, urbancure.org, where you can see the Never Again Protect the Second Amendment video that was done. It was actually a 30-second ad done in-house. My producer, Daniel, who I didn't mention today yet, but now I did, had his hands all over that. And then the video of the actual press conference is also at urbancure.org, and Lonnie is available to collect your information so that he can keep you in touch with the work that we're doing. And I'm just very excited, guys, about as we bring more information to this community. I think that if what you've shown us today, at least I hope that what you've shown, I know you've shown me, but I'm hoping that we'll get the feedback from others to say, and you also showed us, is that there is an opportunity for us to go in these communities and build. When we look at what happened with Nehemiah, he had to present the facts and then said, you got to build with me. And he got a response. They said, yes, we'll build with you. We saw it again with Jonah. As hard as it was for him to go over there to get to the Ninevites, he just didn't know what was going to occur. But I think way down deep inside, at least that's what he admitted later, he knew God was going to touch those people's hearts and they were going to change. And he was just basically telling them, I don't want you to give to them what you've given to me. So we know that he still does that today. And I think that in mentioning, Ken Blanchard, I'm hoping, is that someone you're going to be having as a guest? Now I'm going to ask you in person on air so that you can't say anything but yes.
Yes, we'll definitely have Ken Blanchard on the mic with us.
How we're going to unify ourselves as a people.
Man with a Gun, I think, is his. I'm trying to remember.
Black Man
with a Gun is his website.
It's a little bit intimidating, but he's a minister and he's also a military man.
Ex-military, former Marine.
Oh no, you're once a Marine, you're always a Marine. Semper Fi. So yeah, exactly. And then other pastors that you were going to be inviting as well.
Yes, we have pastors that will be chiming in from across the country. Many of them are bloggers. Many of them have online radio programs. These are men and women that are speaking the truth, and they're bold in doing that. I call them lion chasers because they are bold enough to go in and chase a lion down and kill it, as it says in Scripture, talking about one of David's mighty men.
I'm concerned.
I'm really excited to know over the coming weeks that you'll be hearing about these men and women that are really doing some great works out in the community, and they represent the grassroots movement of what's taking place.
The opposition party doesn't want to talk about it, so I'm going to talk about it.
I'm looking forward to this
talk about number one, the
part of our ministry as well, and this part of Cure. Inside the Beltway with Star Parker, Ministry Monday, and Ministry Mondays will be very excited, and we'll also bring some pastors that are just doing work and need your help. One of the pastors in mind is in California. He's bringing busloads of young children to Washington, D.C. They're driving all the way across country just to find out about the founding principles of this great nation. These are people that have never been out of South Central L.A. They've never seen their nation's capital, and we're going to help him do that. That's Pastor Sylvester Bland, and we'll be making sure that he's on as well. Well, this hour ran out, and I wanted to get, and I don't have time.
Yeah, there are parents, Christian parents, who think these are safe environments for their children. Take them to church on Sunday morning, teach them all about the Lord, lift your hands, pray, and praise.